Hello, we'd like to spend a little bit of time today to discuss settings for the combine, specifically for soybeans. So we're going to take a little bit of time here to walk around the machine and look at the head specifically, just to give you some tricks and tips on how to set this machine up for soybeans and some pre-harvest items that you'll want to put your eyes on. Working off of this head, this is our Hydroflex draper belt head here. Specifically, this is a 40-foot machine, so not a whole lot's changed on the cutter bar at all. There is some differences on the hinge drapers that are out now. I'd encourage you to take a look at those. The center sections are a little bit different. The guards on the outside sections are a little bit different, but how it bolts together and how it functions is virtually the same thing. So when we are inspecting these heads going into the season, really what we have to understand is how good the sections and guards are. So what I'm speaking about directly is the guard and the knife itself. So really what's cutting that material is the guard. So the knife is coming through and with the serrations holding that plant in place and then forcing it on the guard. So it really is a scissor action between the knife and this guard. So this edge here is really important. And what can be a struggle is when we first start off in this season, that's when it's the toughest cutting. So making sure that we have that sharp edge on the guard out of the gate is really important for that material to be able to flow onto the draper belt. So Deere has two options. You've got a green guard and a black guard. Your green guard is going to be your standard option. Your black guard is going to be your high wear solution. So I would honestly push you to go towards the high wear with how much fungicide use is across the territory and how tough some of these stocks have been lately. Just go ahead and jump up to the high wear guard. Next, after we understand our guard and sections, come over to your hold down clips. So these clips themselves, you'll start to notice that they get pretty thin, and that's when we would want to replace them. But if we adjust these correctly, they should last you a good long time. I'd say at least 2 or 3 sections worth of wear on the hold down clips. What you want to do is grab a feeler gauge, a 2/1000 feeler gauge. A business card is also really common too, and you want to see that clearance between the section and that hold down. Now I will tell you, I'm not doing this correctly. You really want to hang this machine off of a combine so our cutter bar is flexed down. So please understand that I shouldn't be doing this on the header cart, but I just want to make sure we understand what this spec is between the clips. You use this 10 millimeter nut here to adjust that spacing, and then once I do that, I'll get those adjusted. I'll hop in the combine, turn on the separator, and let this machine run dry for a little while, and then you'll walk down through here and put your hand on these clips. If any of them have any temperature whatsoever, we need to inspect if we've got a bend in that cutter bar, if it's just too tight or what's going on there. So then the natural place to go is right underneath the cutter bar to the poly. So you've got the individual poly underneath the cutter bar itself, and then your center poly as well as your outside poly. Obviously we need to make sure that those are intact and in good condition. What I really want to call out here is, especially on like the hinge drapers or even these, Deere does offer a high wear option. They are much thicker, so you may have to adjust your cutting angle just a little bit. So keep that in the back of your mind, but really that's a good option for high acres use or those types of scenarios. Okay, so now moving back, you've got the skid shoes that transition the grain up to the belt and then the belt itself. Good idea to just walk down through on these skid shoes to make sure that they're connected together like they're supposed to be and that they're free moving. Just like this head here, it's in pretty good shape. But looking at the draper belt, now this specifically is a 640 FD, so this has a earlier style belt. So what we really want to caution you on here is if there's any fraying at the ends of the belt or cuts, slices, anything like that, this I would probably just replace that belt at that time, because it's a considerable amount of work to get to the belt in season. Now if there's a cut in the center of the belt, just keep an eye on it. Usually a cut in the center won't give you too much problems in the field. Just keep your eye on it. So especially if that happens in season, halfway through, 3/4 way through, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Just keep a close eye on it. With the 700 series or the current production RD heads, they have the raised lips at the end and more of a cleat style on the top and bottom of that belt. The big takeaway with those belts is if you have one that's cut at the bottom of the belt here, you can invert that belt on this same side to get a little bit more life out of that belt. So that's a really good option or a good improvement on the newer heads. With these heads or the 640, if I find a cut on this bottom side of this belt, I would have to replace it with the same side on the opposite end of the head. So if you do have the belt off for any reason, or when you're inspecting this, probably the best time to look at the roller bearings. So at each end of all 4 belts, you have a bar with bearings on each end. If you have that belt off for any reason, just replace those bearings. That's a really cheap insurance policy. But the easily forgotten thing is there's a wear strip that sits between these 2 spots. That also would need to be replaced at that time, because you do have to take the cutter bar all the way off to do that repair. So if you have the cutter bar off or have the belt off, I wouldn't risk it. I'd just go ahead and replace those parts. Couple quick call outs. So this is going to be true on both sides of the head, but you have your drive shaft for your wobble box here. This is a grease point that I would do daily. So this drive shaft is in flux all day long. So we need to make sure that this is really well lubricated so you don't bind that cutter bar by any stretch of the imagination, or you'll get to where you're pushing material really bad up here, just putting way too much force on that cutter bar. That's where you'll see that cutter bar crack out. So definitely spend a lot of time greasing this and making sure it's in good condition going through the season. You have your potentiometer for your header height control. So you've got one on both sides of the head and then one on the back side for the center section of the head. So make sure that this wiring is in good order. And if you have calibration issues, this is where you want to look to make sure it's intact. Also here, you have these DR ports. So one thing that's a pretty common call for Reynolds is if the reel comes up in the center and then out, or if the outside parts of that reel want to flex down, we most likely have air in this system. So there is a bleed procedure that we can do in the cab and with the set screws in the center of the head, but this is just a really good call out that you may need us to come out, or you get a DR connection is what this is called, and just to be able to force that air out of the system. Coming around to the back side of the head here, and again, I'm on a head cart, so this isn't the appropriate time to check this. I just want to call it out. When we store these off season, the belt should be detensioned, and so when you do get this head back on the combine ready to go, just make sure we're tensioning those belts to an adequate level, and then the center belt needs tensioned as well. So a pretty common thing again is having trapped air in this system. The symptom's going to be if the reel itself will raise in the middle or not raise on the outside, or maybe it is raised all the way up and then the outside starts to frown down. The first step to do would be to come out of the machine and turn these set screws all the way in, and then run your reel extend all the way out, hold it out past stop for 10 seconds and back in, and I would do that cycle 4 or 5 times and then set the set screw back out, and this should relieve that issue of the bats not running flush across the head. So when we think about the rotor, we really need to split it into 2 halves. You've got the front half where we're doing the threshing, and then you've got the rear half where we're doing the separating or the actual cleaning of that sample. So when we look at the front half, this is where I want to make sure at least 90%, if not all of the beans are physically out of the pods. I'm not overly concerned if the beans are still left in the rotor at this time, because that's really what we do in the back half. So just looking at the front half currently, we have round bar in both sides. That's a really generic setup and a good setup for this part of the world, in corn and soybeans alike. But speaking specifically to soybeans here, this is set up for early season application. situation where you might have green pods or really tough threshing conditions, we've got the wheat inserts installed. Now this is a good solution and a quick, easy solution. That way this rotor is really adaptable to both tough threshing soybeans, and then you can quickly take those out once the soybeans get drier, or if you're switching into a cornfield, you can take those out relatively easy. That's a good option for a variety of setups. All right, so looking at some other concave options that John Deere offers in the marketplace, this has been a fairly common option, especially if you have any amount of wheat. I'd almost say that this is the best solution for wheat. This is the small wire concave. Now, if you have these, they are also a really good option in soybeans as well, full season option in soybeans. So historically, there's been a lot of operations that will have a set of these and round bars. You have these installed for your soybean cutting, and then move over to the round bars when you're really shelling late season corn. So if you look at these, one recommendation I would make is you want all these wires installed for wheat, but I would really take out every other wire in soybeans just to help clean that soybean out. If we have good test weight, those beans will have a hard time getting through these grates. They also make a large wire concave, which is basically that same thing. It's a little larger wire, but there's a lot more space between the wires. Frankly, if you take out every other wire, you're getting the same experience. The issue with continuing to leave these in the machine, if you do shell corn with them, they will plug pretty easily. This could be an okay option if you have like a white cob or a really wet kernel that is having a hard time getting off the cob. It may not hurt to put one of these in the front section, but I wouldn't have a full 2 sets or 3 sets of these in the combine at all for corn. Now, a newer option that I have really grown to love is the Condex Concaves. This is actually a factory option today from the harvester factory, where you can get these already installed on the machine, or your local Reynolds dealer can sell these over the counter today, which is, in my opinion, excellent. Now, just to make sure we clarify something, this is out of an X9 machine. I didn't have one for the S series, but it's the same principle. So what we have here, this is what they call the max thresh concave, and then you have the max round. So the way you got to think about this is this together replaces one Deere concave. So these two replace one here, but you would have this max thresh in the front position, and then this max round in the second position, and then a series of rounds behind that, just the normal Deere round concaves. Frankly, this is excellent for both tough threshing soybeans to late season dry soybeans, and you don't have to change anything. This is absolutely fantastic for corn, a full season solution. So I highly encourage this, where we used to have several different concaves to really do a good job in the different crops, corn, soybeans, and wheat. This is excellent for all of those scenarios. So now, after we understand what concaves that we want in the machine, probably one of the most overlooked adjustments is making sure the concaves are level in that rotor and making sure the rasp bars are intact. So start looking at the rasp bars first, spin that rotor around, make sure they're in good condition, you don't have any broken off, any chips, anything like that, because that dramatically affects the balance of the rotor. And if you do find one that is broke and needs replaced, you actually need to replace them in pairs of 3. So if you replace one, you need to buy 3 and put them on equal spots on the rotor. Just consult the operator's manual to understand that specifically, but that way we maintain that balance in these rotors. Otherwise, you really will feel it in the machine. But once we have that problem solved, you want to run your concaves as tight as they will go. So there's a calibration that we can show you a little bit later in the video, but get that concave clearance to 0, and you want to make sure that the rotor can spin freely at that setting. And then you want to make sure the distance between the round bar and the rotor itself is the same from the front of the rotor to the midpoint of the rotor, and then I would check the rear of the rotor as well. And we want to make sure that that concave section here is running level with that rotor. What will happen is, or what you'll notice, if we are wider in the back, you'll see a lot of loose material or mog, material other than grain, dump wherever it is farther away from that rotor, and your threshing performance will be really, really poor. So this is a common issue that we see in the field when we're starting to troubleshoot some threshing issues. This is one of the first things I always check. Now we'll move back to the back half of the rotor, or the separation area. Again, just a quick understanding, I want the beans out of the pods in the front half of the rotor, but I want the beans out of the rotor here. That really dumps the beans in a good spot to help get it on the right area in the cleaning shoe. So if we look at the separator grates, there's a couple different options here as well. And this combine is actually set up for corn. And how I know that is our spacer plates here, these spacer bolts, are in the installed position is the language that the book will use. So we have those installed. The separator grates are farther away from the rotor, allows more room for that higher bushel material, the corn, to get through that area. In soybeans, I would really recommend those spacers be uninstalled, or you take those bolts out and you put those spacers on the top side of that bracket, or the top side of that bolt. You might be okay in this if it's a really high productive field, or if you really make sure you manage how full this machine is. You might be able to get away with it in both scenarios, corn and soybeans. But for this soybean video, I would ask that those be uninstalled. Looking at the separator grates themselves, this is just the standard separator grate that comes out of the factory. Really a good solution for soybeans here as well. So this is how I would recommend that setup be as well. And then you want to look at the separator tines. So just like the rasp bars up front, we need to put an eye on the separator tines in the back half as well. Make sure they're all in good shape, and not damaged by any means. And if you find one that is, we need to replace a couple more just to maintain that balance again. Now we're going to move underneath the rotor where we really start doing some cleaning. So first we'll start at the shoe augers or floor augers here. The biggest thing with the augers, obviously checking the bearings, making sure everything is tight and good running order there. But when we're in the field, this is the area I really recommend doing a stalk kill and get a good image of how your material is running through the machine, because more than anything, I need to make sure that the crop material is evenly spread across this cleaning shoe. What I mean by that is I don't want a whole lot of pods and beans in these first two belly troughs and not a whole lot on the opposite side, which we'll find from time to time. If we get into that scenario, we need to start looking at the levelness of the concaves again, make sure our rasp bar's in good condition, make sure that we're running the rotor RPM fast enough to be able to move that material around the rotor. But this is our first opportunity to be able to make sure we're doing a good job cleaning over the Chaffer and Sieve. So if you really struggle with this, especially in soybeans, they do have cover plates that you can put on the rotor. That way we can cover up the front top sides of these these concaves, so that we can push more of that material, maintain that material in the rotor longer to get to the other side. Now, if we move back, you've got the pre-cleaner here. Now, earlier S-Series machines, this wasn't adjustable, so that's really why I encourage in high productivity crop that we really try to maintain that material in the rotor as long as we can to get that trash further back in the rotor, because what happens is whatever falls through this area is going to the tank. None of this will ever make it to your pre-cleaner, or excuse me, none of this will make it to the Chaffer and Sieve if it's going through here. So really manage that. If you're really needing that perfectly clean sample, the best way to do that is try to pick up your rotor speeds a little bit, run your concaves a little tighter, just to try to maintain that crop flow through there. But once we get past this area, so if we dump a lot of that grain here, now we're going to get that clean grain through the pre-cleaner and into the tank and out of the cleaning shoe, but then everything else is going to go through the chaffer and sieve to really blow out that finer material. So now we're going to talk about the chaffer and sieve. So really the most important thing here is, one, understand which chaffer and sieve you have in there. They're the general purpose, which we have in this machine, or the deep tooth. That's a really good option for corn. But for soybeans, you need to understand which one you have for sure. So when we look at the chaffer and sieve, the first thing is to make sure that those louvers can go from a fully closed position to a fully opened position. You can easily do that here by running your chaffer and sieve settings here and watching how freely those move, and then making sure that calibration number has a good reference of 0 versus a number. I've never really been overly particular about making sure like a millimeter size opening or anything's accurate. I will usually just take a 5mm or an 8mm bolt and find that happy medium for what that reference number is, so I kind of have an idea of what the numbers mean up in the cab. Then lastly, once we understand that everything's functioning and working and what we have, really take the time to make sure none of those louvers are bent. That's really where we can get escapes for pods or those things. So just understand the position and the condition that they're in. Then settings. It really affects how much airflow comes through this machine on how closed that we have these. There will be times where operators will close these down thinking that's going to clean up the sample, and that's not necessarily true. If we close the sieve down too much, you will really push a lot of that airflow more towards the back of the machine, so we're not getting good lift of the trash, the bog, in the front section of that sieve. So I would encourage that you leave your sieve open more than what you may think is necessary, and then really manage your chaffer, your upper sieve, in order to manage how clean that sample is. So while you're in here noticing your conditions of your chaffer and sieve, it's also a really good time to look up at the discharge beater. You have those serrated slats that are bolted to the discharge beater. If those start to get worn, then you'll notice a lot of clumping right behind the combine, because it's just puking the mog right off of the back of the chaffer and not pushing that material to the chopper or the spreader. So you can rotate those. So this, if you take a look at these, they're pretty smooth on both sides, so they've probably already rotated these once, and that's perfectly fine. But I would imagine this operator will need to replace those going into the fall of 26. Now, looking at our chopper and spreader, a couple quick things to know. As far as speed on the chopper and soybeans, you'll want to have this lever pulled out. So we're in the high speed on your chopper. And then I would have the knives either 3/4 or maybe even a half engaged, depending on how dry the fodder is. So starting out maybe 3/4, and then as the material gets drier and drier, start backing your knife engagement back a little bit. I never recommend them being fully engaged, which is what we see here, because that is a horsepower hog. If we don't need to really get that fine of a material, if that's fine with you and your operation, back that out just a little bit. I'm going to say that you'll probably notice very little change in how fine the trash is coming out of the back of the material, but you'll find a huge fuel savings in backing those knives out just a little bit. So when we look at the knives, obviously I would just replace those year over year. Keep the knives themselves as new as possible and as sharp as possible. It's the discharge beater. They take a lot of beating and they're fine, so they can look really worn, and they're probably going to do a good enough job getting that material through the spreader. But if you do find that they need replaced, or you find one broken, you have to replace those in pairs. If not, again, you'll have some vibration issues and loss of performance due to balancing problems. Then lastly, looking at our discharge paddles. It really just dictates on how large your head is. So the wider heads, the 45s, and even the 50-foot, these better be in really, really good shape to expect us to spread 45 feet. Where these are getting marginal, but I don't know that I would replace them yet. If they were any more rounded off at the edge, you're really going to notice degradation in how far that pattern spreads or how even that pattern spreads. I have seen some stainless kits that you could add to those. That's a really good option here as well. So looking at our crop deflector here going in to the chopper, for soybeans, we'll have this in the small grain position, so this lever where it's at now, just make sure that's there. Continuing down the right-hand side of the machine, we got a clean grain elevator as well as our tailings elevator here. So a couple things that we need to understand. Now, first off, this is a S780, so our 780s, 790s will have our refresher here. So there is a setting that we need to adjust on this concave adjustment here. So I would have this in the grain position for soybeans. Honestly though, if you're really worried about splits or cracks, I would leave this in the corn position at that point too. Then moving down, this is a great example where we've got a couple good chains that we need to make sure are in good condition. I would take those off and physically inspect all the links and all the connectors to make sure that chain's not going to give you any fits through the season. This machine also has the optional harvest automation feature here. So I would encourage you to open these cameras up, take some Windex, clean those cameras off, make sure there's not a whole lot of debris or last year's residue build up behind the cameras that will affect their performance. So you would have the camera on the tailings elevator and a camera on the clean grain tank. Then lastly, we need to look at our auger. So this would be the auger that's feeding the camera for the tailings, and then we have the auger. This one here is also feeding your moisture sensor. Please open these up and clean these out really, really well. It seems like it's often that we'll blow the fuses for these motors because of having rotten material left in these over time. And that fuse is probably small to protect this motor. I'm not saying put a larger fuse in there. I'm saying let's clean this out and pay mind to both of these augers here. Now, when we talk about the elevators themselves, that technology's been around for quite some time, and you can see that we still have a fair amount of adjustment within this one. So this one's in really pretty good shape, but you'd want to expect to make sure that the tension on that chain is accurate, and as well that those paddles are all in good shape all the way around. So take your time here, because this is what helps get that grain away from the sieve in order to maintain your capacity in the machine. So we'll start off at the front of the machine here at the feeder house. This is obviously where we're the first opportunity we have to damage the crop going into the machine, and really how well we're feeding the rotor is quite crucial. So spend some time here. So looking at the drum itself, we have our slats that we need to be able to make sure that they're in good condition and are tight and good position across this drum, and make sure that your slats are intact all the way across. I've seen that if these have cracks or damaged or bent in any way, you'll get a lot of crop damage here potentially. So just make sure they're in good shape. One recommendation too is if we're really worried about splits in the soybeans, I like to leave this drum in this raised position with the smooth side of the bar facing down. It's if we get really tough conditions or having a hard time feeding that material through the feeder house, you can flop these around and have the serrated edge down and even put the drum in the lowered position. So if we look at that position, you would have this pin on either side, and you can raise or lower that drum. Again, my recommendation for both soybeans in this scenario and corn would be just to leave this in the raised position. For the chain here, we need to make sure this is on the 26 tooth or the smaller sprocket here for soybeans, and then moving up your feed accelerator back behind the feeder house, this lever that's adjusting your belt speed, this needs to be in the low speed here as well. Then you'll want to take off these inspection covers and make sure those bars, just like on that we'll talk about on the discharge beater, you have serrated or smooth, that should be serrated, that those are all intact all the way across that feed accelerator as well. Again, we will get damage here if we're not set up, or if there's damage within those slats, and we could absolutely get some material or seed damage if our feed accelerator is in poor condition as well. So lastly, on the feeder house, just talk about this single point connector real quick. Over time, I've seen a lot of these have pins that are pushed back, either here on this, on the combine side, or the header side. So take your time to inspect those pins. I would highly encourage getting some dielectric grease and some electrical contact cleaner and clean this off really, really well, and put some dielectric grease. That way when you're connecting and disconnecting this, it's lubricated well so we don't push those pins back. And then especially right when you pull these machines out of the barn, the cable or linkage from this handle to your locking pins like to seize up. So before you try to even hook up a head, I would encourage that you run this through its cycle and put some dry film lubricator on those pins on either side. That way you're not struggling to take your heads on and off. A little bit of a controversial statement. I do highly encourage, especially on the newer heads, that you turn the combine off when you plug in. We are connecting an electrical connector onto the CAN system, so you're going to have times, few and far between, yes, but there is a potential that it won't recognize the header height control or the folding functionality, some of those things, if you just plug it in with the machine on. A simple key cycle should fix that problem, but it's probably a good idea to get in a habit of just turning the key off on the combine before you hook up a head. So now we'll go ahead and move into the combine to make some of our final adjustments. If we look at the monitor itself, so some of those internal combine adjustments that we need to be, should be in one of your run pages, or if you hit menu and harvest settings, that will get us to the same spot. And here we're going to look at our threshing clearance first. So for soybeans, I would recommend to start with it at like 15 if we've got those concaves really good level, and then adjust from there as a good starting point. Threshing speed, I would recommend starting around 500 RPM, and again, adjusting up or down from the conditions that you're in. The threshing speed's a good example of where the machine and the separator will have to be on before you can adjust that number. Cleaning fan's the same way. The machine will need to be on and separator engaged in order to get your cleaning fan number to adjust, but highly encourage just setting that at 1,000, and honestly probably just leaving it at 1,000. Chaffer clearance and sieve clearance. So your chaffer clearance, again, I would start around the 14 number. And then sieve clearance, I usually start at 14 as well, and then I try not to mess with my sieve clearance at all, and I will start to close down my chaffer to clean up my sample. Now, a common understanding here is the performance target monitor. This 30 that we see here, there's no rhyme to reason to that number. That is solely based off how we calibrate this machine and what we tell this machine is acceptable. So this is something that you definitely need to consult the operator's manual for to get it set up correctly in order to have a good understanding of what that integer actually means. Now, I really understand that this is a lot of information and it can be overwhelming to go from corn to soybeans, back to corn, and trying to understand where all these numbers are. I highly, highly encourage any operator to download the Equipment Mobile app. If we get into the Equipment Mobile app and go to your machine, we can go to Equipment Information and Crop Settings, and it's going to spell out exactly where John Deere recommends all the outside settings as well as these in the monitor settings too. That way it's not really a guessing game. You've got that number right in the palm of your hand to start the machine. So hopefully this conversation's been really helpful to identify those main things that we want to look at before we go to the field with these machines, and give you some tips on what to adjust if you're seeing issues within the field. The reality of it is there's a lot here, and we could spend hours talking about things like harvest automation setup, variety locator maps, and those scenarios. So please feel free to reach out to Reynolds Farm Equipment. We've got a team ready to help you guys. The other really fantastic option from Deere is that equipment mobile app. I highly encourage anybody that has any John Deere piece of equipment to download the equipment mobile app, and it's going to walk you through the operator's manual. It's going to walk you through the 50-hour, the 200, the 1,000-hour service intervals, and really highlight the same things that we discussed here today.